Good morning, fourth graders. I'm going to get right to sharing. This is the recording of lesson 3 in your social studies reflections book. So let's get to it. Please have your reflections book out as well so that you can follow along. Let's get rid of this. And let's see. Should be right up. Here it is. All right, you guys. So we are going to get started. Let me open this up all the way. In your books, please go to page 246. Again, this is your reflections book. And I hope that when I scroll, this is always why it's so weird to me. Let's see if I do this. I think I'm going to just do it like that. I think it's easier that way. All right, page 246, lesson 3, California becomes a state. So exciting. So again, always look up at this timeline. Remember, we're kind of in the midst of the gold rush. So that's 1849, right? And you can see it up here. Delegates at Monterey write the California Constitution. And then in 1850, California becomes a state on September 9th, right? So imagine you are there. San Francisco was just a small, quiet town when you arrived 8 months ago. Now, in 1849, it's the largest city in the West. You were part of the gold rush and created this population boom in California. You and others are now beginning to talk about California's becoming a state. California leaders have called a meeting in Monterey to discuss statehood. You are excited and also nervous about California's history. The Monterey Convention. In 1847, the United States took control of California. Since that time, California had been ruled by United States military officials. Under military rule, Californians had no rights except those given them by the military governor. At first, people had not complained much about military rule. Then the gold rush brought tens of thousands of newcomers from the United States to California. They wanted the same rights in California as they had in the United States. So did many of the people who had already been living in California. At this time, the United States Congress was busy dealing with rising conflicts over slavery and other issues between the northern states and the southern states. Its members were not able to pass laws that would create a new government for California. General Bennett Riley, the new military governor of California, decided to call for a convention. At this important meeting to be held in Monterey, decisions would be made about California's future. Delegates were elected to attend the convention. A delegate is a person chosen to speak and act for the people who elected him or her. So here you can see this picture. The delegates who met at Monterey represented people from all over parts of California. The delegates came from different backgrounds, but worked together to make decisions for all Californians. Here's a fast fact. The 48 delegates to the Monterey Convention met in Colton Hall, the only building in California at the time large enough to hold such a gathering. I'm on page 248. A Constitution for California. Californians elected 48 delegates to attend the convention. They included both new immigrants and members of old Californio families, such as Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo. Vallejo had lived in California since the time of Spanish rule. We know him, don't we? He was one of 8 Californios elected to the convention. The delegates quickly decided that California should become a state. Next, they had to decide what land would become the state of California. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo had set California's southern border with Mexico. The Pacific Ocean formed the state's western boundary. The northern border was the Oregon Territory. It was the eastern boundary that the delegates had to set. The decision about the eastern border was one of the most important that the delegates had to make. Should California include all of the land that the United States had gained from Mexico? The delegates decided against this. They thought that the area would be too large to govern. That means to rule and to set laws for. They decided that the eastern boundary of California should be marked by the Sierra Nevada and the Colorado River. Another decision the delegates faced was whether California would be a slave state or a free state. In slave states, people were allowed, we'll come back to these pictures, to own slaves. In free states, they were not. All of the delegates voted that California should be a free state. So that means no slaves were allowed. The delegates also made decisions about education in the new state. They called for the creation of a state public school system. That's what you guys attend, public school. These decisions and others were written into a constitution or plan of government for the new state. In just 6 weeks, the delegates wrote the Constitution of 1849. It gave Californians new rights and freedoms. For the first time, California citizens would have a voice in their own government. They could now vote for their leaders, such as a governor and members of the state legislature. A legislature is a group of officials elected to make laws. In November 1849, the people of California voted to ratify or approve the new Constitution. They elected state lawmakers, including Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo. In addition, they chose Peter H. Burnett to be the first state governor. So here he is, Peter H. Burnett. He was California's first governor. Let's go back up here for a second. So this is a photograph, the members of the first graduating class of the first high school of San Francisco. Shown here, this is 1859. They were among the first people to benefit from California's public school system. That's pretty incredible. And then back up here, this is democratic values. Being able to own your own property is a right that people value. It says California's Constitution granted Nancy Kelsey, this is her, and other women in California many rights that women in other parts of the United States did not have. So you can read that. Let's keep going. So we're moving to page 250. The 31st state. After the elections in 1849, California's 2 senators went to Washington, D.C. There, they asked Congress to allow California to join the United States. Congress is the part of the United States government that makes laws. California's request set off a huge debate. At that time, the United States had the same number of free states as slave states. Most free states were in the North. Most slave states were in the South. Southerners did not want to break this balance by letting California join as a free state. Finally, members of Congress worked out a compromise. People on each side of the argument agreed to give up something. Under the Compromise of 1850, California joined the Union as a free state. In exchange, Congress passed a law, the Fugitive Slave Act, that said anyone who was caught helping an escaped slave would be punished. California officially became a state on September 9th, 1850. The new state government faced some early challenges. First, it had to choose a location for the state capital. The capital was moved from Monterey to San Jose. Then it was moved to Vallejo and later to Benicia. Finally, in 1854, the capital of California was moved to Sacramento. And that's where it still is today. We know that. Another big challenge had to do with taxes. A large part of the population in California were people, such as miners, who did not own land. As a result, the state was not able to collect enough property taxes to pay its bills. Also, banks in other parts of the United States did not want to lend money to banks in California. So here is Sacramento, right? Here's the Capitol building, and it just reminds us Sacramento became California's capital in 1854, but the Capitol building was not completed until 1874. So goodness, it took 20 years. And this is a building. Sadly, we usually visit it as a field trip in fourth grade, but you can go there. So you and your families, once things open up a little bit more, can head over or at least drive by to see it. The end of the ranchos. The state government also faced troubles over land ownership. Many people who stayed in California after the gold rush lived on unmarked lands that were parts of ranchos. This led to arguments over who owned the land. To settle these disputes, the United States Congress passed the Land Act of 1851. This law said that the rancheros or rancho owners had to prove that the land belonged to them. This was hard for some of the rancheros to do. Most of them did not speak English, and few government officials spoke Spanish. It was also difficult for some rancheros to prove that they had received their land grants legally. Most had received their grants when California was ruled by Mexico. In addition, hand-drawn diseños were often not correct. So that was kind of troubling, hard to prove that the land belonged to some of the ranch owners. So here it says California celebrated statehood with parades, dances, and speeches. And one more fast fact. Californians did not learn about their statehood until October 18th, 1850. On that day, Helen Crosby and a group of California leaders arrived in Monterey aboard the steamship Oregon. In the folds of her umbrella, she carried the official documents granting California statehood. All right, the last page. Many rancheros had to hire lawyers and had to sell their lands to pay their bills. In the end, most large ranchos were broken up. The fight over land ownership affected the state's population as well. Because of the long legal arguments, many people who might have settled in California decided not to. Here's a little summary. In 1848, California leaders gathered to decide California's statehood and to write a state constitution. The Compromise of 1850 allowed California to become a state. The new state faced a lack of tax revenue and fights over land ownership. So here's a photo. Among the state of California's early leaders were, here's from left to right, this man right here, Pablo de la Guerra, Salvador Vallejo, he's in the middle, and Andres Pico. All right, you guys, go ahead and make sure to look back through the photos and read any extra bits. I thought this would be an interesting thing to read, kind of the argument between the pros and cons, different points and views about California gaining statehood. So you might want to read that. And I will see you this afternoon. All right, have a good morning.